Hi, welcome back to the Fantasy Football Profits. Thanks for joining us. It's the off-season as far as fantasy football goes, although football is still going on. We've got the conference championship games going on this weekend and the Super Bowl. But once again, I love talking fantasy football, and someone say it's a little too early to talk fantasy football, but is it ever an off-season for fantasy football? For me personally, I always love talking about it. I'm excited to look ahead to 2019. So we're going to do a video called Breakout Players for 2019. I think that's vitally important, but before we get into breakout players for next year, I think it's important to define what is a breakout player. Everybody's definition may vary. So here's what we did. We did some research. We looked at other sites. People talked about it, and we landed on this definition. Here's what we consider a breakout player. Okay. A breakout player is a fantasy football player who has been ineffective or marginal in the past, who suddenly becomes a fantasy football stud one year. Breakout players can happen every year in fantasy football. The question, who's going to be next year's breakout players? These are guys that are great. One, you can get yourself great steals, finds like that. For me personally, if you're in dynasty leagues, understanding breakout players is really vital, especially this time of year as we look ahead. I'll give you an example. I'm in a dynasty league and we keep 5 players, and I had 4 players that I knew I was going to keep. They're very good, solid, they were locked in, but I had 3 or 4 other players I really wasn't sure who I was going to keep of those guys. And I had 3 running backs. I had Jordan Howard, who had back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons. Matt Nagy's taken over. Seemed like he might be a good fit there for a guy that you want to keep. I had Deion Lewis. It's a PPR league, and Deion Lewis has been a solid back, and he thrives in PPR league scoring. Both of those guys came off of solid years. And then my other back that I had was Joe Mixon. And so as we studied analytics, looked at some things, offensive line, Cincinnati, some changes being made, some sabermetrics, we had felt, and if you watch us last year in the preseason, we were huge on Joe Mixon. We really felt like he was going to rebound. So for me, he was a breakout player. He's who I ended up keeping. I got rid of the other guys, and I'm glad that I did. He had a very good year, and I'm set for guys in the future. Once again, looking ahead to breakout players is so important and help you get steals in the draft, things like that. So let's just get right into it. Anything you want to add before we get into our first breakout player?
No, absolutely. I do love the fact that we just got to point out, again, Dynasty Keeper Leagues, that's where it really matters. Of course, here in a standard league, this video doesn't matter too much. You could always wait to do this. However, it is never too early for fantasy football. One thing to mention is there's a lot of things this offseason, the draft and free agency, and of course, injuries going into next year that we just don't know about. And so players with those sort of question marks, we're not going to talk about in this video.
Okay.
All right, so I'll start us off with our first guy here, Robby Anderson. I think he is a prime candidate to be a huge breakout player in 2019. Now, the past 2 seasons, he has definitely been held back by his quarterback play, or by the play of his quarterback, I should say. And I think that has really been something that has held him back. However, we've seen some real flashes of brilliance. He's really shined at times. 2 years ago, he had, what was that, 6-game stretch with 6 or 7 touchdowns. He looked phenomenal. And, we thought that maybe this year might have been the year, but of course, we even came out and said that we just don't trust his quarterback situation. And sure enough, that was a huge problem for him. Sam Darnold struggled, and thus Robby Anderson struggled. However, 3 of the last 4 games, Robby Anderson, who really was banged up and struggled with injury all season, he finally got healthy, and Sam Darnold finally started to play well, and we saw the sort of wide receiver that he can be. In 3 of the last 4 games, he averaged over 10 targets, 100 receiving yards, and he had 3 touchdowns in that span. And so he was very, very effective, even though he went up against some pretty good defenses, at least past defenses, Buffalo, Houston, and New England. And so that bodes very well for him. Again, Sam Darnold over that span was very, very impressive. So what we see is that Sam Darnold had a quarterback rating of like 45 to 48 in that range all season long, and he just wasn't effective. But finally, Sam Darnold gets that up. In that 3-game span, he was averaging 254 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a quarterback rating of 79. And that's when all of a sudden he was allowed to have 3 touchdowns in 3 games and average over 100 yards and look phenomenal. It is very obvious to me that he is a good wide receiver that will break out if Sam Darnold can continue to develop as a quarterback. And the other thing to note is that I think over that span he played better, and a lot of people thought, well, okay, we'll look at it. Okay, he had a great stretch, Sam Darnold did, but he can't do that for a whole season next season. Well, only 254 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a quarterback rating of 79, better than he did last year, but really, really far from outrageous numbers. Those numbers are just good or just okay. They're not insane. Of course, you got to like the deep ball ability by Robby Anderson. One thing that keeps him valuable in fantasy is ability to make a big play, a big fantasy move. at any point in the game. In fact, he averaged 16.3 yards downfield per target. So he's on average 16.3 yards downfield every time the ball was targeted to him. That makes him a very big deep ball threat, a very big playmaker. I'm very excited about him. Again, really tied to his quarterback, and I think second year Sam Darnold is going to definitely help him out a lot as he develops.
All right. So a guy that I think is going to have a breakout season next year is Evan Engram. Okay, the tight end position is thin to begin with. You look at former stalwarts like Gronkowski, who's looking a bit slower. He's just not the player that he was in the past. And a guy like Greg Olsen, who's unable to keep his foot healthy. And I think at this point, I think going into next year, he's going to be 34 years old. I really think it's time for that next generation of tight ends to begin to take over. And we really saw that changing of the guard this year as Travis Kelce has overtaken Gronkowski as the best tight end in the league. I suppose you could argue George Kittle there and Zach Ertz, but for me right now, the number one tight end is Kelce. I think another guy that's going to join that group and become an elite tight end is Evan Engram. Now, going all the way back before he started his rookie year, he drew rave reviews coming out of the combine. He got drafted in the preseason. Just some quotes. You look at Giants' great tight end, Mark Bavaro, who had a great history there. He's been with the organization for quite a while. Here's what he said about him as a player, what he said. He said, he's unbelievable. I don't know what he's going to look like in pads, playing football, but he can move, he can run, he can catch, he's impressive. And he went out that first year as a rookie and had a very good rookie season. Finished the year with 64 catches, 722 yards, and 6 touchdowns, playing on an offense that often struggled. He's fast, athletic, he's got good hands. Now, he's a tight end that's actually a little bit smaller than your prototypical tight end back in the day that might be brought in for blocking. But I think that's okay because his skill set is closer to a wide receiver. And I think what that does, it gives him a higher statistical fantasy football ceiling. So I like the fact that even though he is a little bit smaller, and we're going to read about it a little bit, we'll discuss this, he can play more like a wide receiver at times. I think that's going to boost his fantasy value. So he starts this season, the first 3 games, he's got 23 receptions, 257 yards, and 2 touchdowns. But he gets injured. Eli Manning struggled a little bit. There's some ineffectiveness there, so he kind of disappeared in the middle of the season. But he came back his last 4 games. Now, here's what he averaged his last 4 games, okay? He averaged 5.5 catches per game and 80 yards. You take that, you project that over 16 games. That turns out to be 88 catches for 1,260 yards. If you put that up, if you project that out for the season, that would have left him 3rd in yards behind only Kelce and Kittle, who, by the way, Kelce and Kittle went out this year, and what did they do? Set the record for most receiving yards by a tight end in history. So those numbers that he would have had were phenomenal. He also would have ended up 3rd in catches, tied with Kittle. So once again, those numbers, you project that out, are really solid. I don't think it's a fluke. I don't think we're twisting numbers here because I know you can play games with numbers a little bit. But in this case, he is the real deal. He really does have that high level. He's very skilled. In fact, according to NFL.com, going back to the combine, he ran a 4.42 40-yard dash, which is unheard of for tight ends. He had a 36-inch vertical leap. He bench pressed 225 19 times. This guy's athletic. He's got all the skills to be a great tight end. Now, the only concern I have for him is the quarterback situation. Nothing against Eli Manning. I think if Eli were to retire, I think the entire offense would get better. Although I will say this. Coach Sherman there seemed to really turn things around the second half. If you look at that team, he came and it took a while, I'm sure, to implement his offense and make adjustments to do some things. The Giants averaged 27.4 points scored per game in the second half of the season compared to only 18.8 the first half. And so that offense seemed to make some adjustments, which is very interesting because late in the year, they didn't have Odell Beckham yet. They still put points on the board there. So we know that Sherman's done this before. It's not the first time he's able to come in and work some magic with quarterbacks. He did that with Nick Foles, who back in 2013 had a quarterback rating of 119. He had 27 touchdown passes and only 2 interceptions. He also did great with Case Keenum, who had a career year at the Vikings. Of course, now Case Keenum goes out to Denver there, and we see that probably what we saw with the Vikings was more of an anomaly, and we saw him kind of fall back to the Case Keenum that we've seen previously. So you add the fact that Pat Sherman's a good coach. We think he'll do wonders with that offense. And then you add Barkley and Odell Beckham there. Evan Engram is rarely going to see double teams or the other team's top defenders. That's going to leave him in one-on-one coverage a lot. You look at his yards after the catch. It's increased. First year's yards after catch were 4.5 as a rookie, and this year 8.5. And so there's an increase there. We see an adjustment. He had nearly 100 more yards after the catch this season despite playing 300 less snaps due to injury. I love the fact he's not complacent. Already going into the offseason, he's already targeted one of his goals is become more explosive. I like that a guy goes out there, has success, and still wants to improve on that. Going back to what we previously had said, his skill set more resembles a wide receiver than it does a tight end. I think that's important because they can line him up in other positions other than tight end. In fact, if you look at it this year, he often was a pseudo wide receiver. Here's how Pro Football Focus looked at his breakdown as far as when Evan Engram lined up. He was on the line as a tight end, kind of typical in that room there. He lined up on the line 51% line. He lined up in the slot 35% of the time, wide receiver 12% of the time, and in the backfield 1.3%. Once again, I like this guy. I think Evan Engram becomes an elite tight end. I think he's going to have a breakout year. I know you've got him in a keeper league, and I think you're really wrestling with him. You should keep him. I would advise you to do it. I think this guy's going to be really good. I think he's going to be top 5, could even be top 3. He's got that sort of a high ceiling. So.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. To note, the reason I'm questioning whether or not to keep him is because of a lot of other talent to have at other positions. I completely agree with you. He's going to have a huge season, so it's nothing against him when I definitely question that at times.
Yeah, you're stacked there, so.
All right, so we got another tight end here, and what about O.J. Howard? First things first, I want to tell you that I love O.J. Howard. He's a big-bodied tight end. He's about 6'5". He's a pretty heavy dude. He is very athletic. In fact, he's looking like he's developing into the next Rob Gronkowski, only hopefully with less injury issues for sure. Of course, he plays very well with Jameis Winston, a first-round 19th overall pick in 2017. Tampa Bay Buccaneers took him as their first guy in that draft, and they loved him. They were very excited about him. And you know what? They made a great pick. They really did. He comes at his rookie year and sets a rookie record for highest passer rating generated. And so essentially what that is when a quarterback throws to him, they take that passer rating between those two guys when they're making connections or when they're being targeted, and see what that is. And he was generating a passer rating of 148. He was extremely productive in getting the job done. And then he comes into this year, and a lot of people are wondering what he's going to do, and I kind of liked him, but a lot of people were saying, I know even you and Ryan said this at times, was, well, he'll be held back by Cameron Brate. And I thought that was certainly the case, but when you look into some of the numbers, that's not the case. First of all, he had 565 receiving yards and 5 touchdowns in just 10 games. That number is very impressive. When you look at the thin tight end position, a lot of tight ends would be lucky to do that in 16 games. Of course, that's very impressive. But that does put him on pace for 904 yards and 8 touchdowns. Heck, just 15 years ago, that would have made him the best tight end in the NFL. Of course, things have changed, but that definitely puts him up there as one of the best fantasy tight ends at that pace. So I guess the question we have to ask ourselves is, going forward, is he going to improve? One, yes, I think he's going to improve. He's still a very young tight end, and as we've talked about countless times on this channel, and I don't want to waste too much time talking about it, the tight end position takes a while to develop. It's not like running back. It's not like a lot of other positions where you can hop in and use your athleticism to make plays. You have to develop. It takes a long time because you have to learn both the nuances as a wide receiver and as an offensive lineman, as a blocker, and so that definitely is something that is going to slow down their development. Again, so I think you can see that going forward. But then again, the other thing is Cameron Brate, right? Is Cameron Brate going to slow him down? Well, I don't think that's the case. He far and away outperformed Cameron Brate last year. Despite only playing in 10 games, he almost doubled his receiving yards. In Cameron Brate, half of Cameron Brate's touchdowns came in games where O.J. Howard did not play. So I think you can really see when you look at the games that Howard played and Brate played, Howard was hands down the #1 tight end in that offense, and he was used a lot. Furthermore, a lot of O.J. Howard's production came with Jameis Winston and not with Fitzpatrick. When Fitzpatrick played, he didn't seem to target Howard as much. And of course, that bodes very well going forward, as it seems Jameis Winston will be the quarterback next year there in Tampa. And so I think there's a lot to look forward to in O.J. Howard. This isn't a very complex situation. He's just a guy who came out his rookie year, played all right, played good last year. He just needs to play a whole season and show us that he can be the starting tight end for a whole season. I'm very excited about him. Rob, what do you think?
Yeah, I like O.J. Howard. I think he's going to be great. I think he's another guy. I don't see him in the top 5 per se, but I definitely think he's top 10. I think he's very solid. With that said, though, he came out of college. He was very athletic. He's rated very high, so he does have a high ceiling there. He's a guy that maybe could break into the top 5. Once again, I do like him quite a bit. So I feel like I'm a broken record here talking about Kenyan Drake having a breakout season, because we were big on him going into this year, but we'll get to that shortly. You look at Kenyan Drake, he's been solid in his career, but he's been far from great. I think that would be pretty accurate to describe him. So it moves him from being a solid player to becoming a stud or a breakout player. The departure of Adam Gase. I think that's going to make all the difference in the world there. Let's go back to one season. Okay, let's go back to the Dolphins a year ago. They trade away Jay Ajayi, and that leaves Damian Williams and Drake. And everybody assumed that Damian Williams would become the lead back there and be the better of the two backs. Williams, who, by the way, this year's gone out for Kansas City, has been great. They signed him a 2-year contract extension, and he appears to be the lead back going into the next year. Okay, So Williams did not shine. Just like Jay Ajayi, he was very average. They had the same offensive line, quarterback, same play calling as Drake. But Drake, when he was given the opportunity last year, exploded. He had great numbers. In fact, he had a 5-game stretch at the end of the year there where he had 444 rushing yards, okay? More than any running back during that stretch. He had a great yards per carry of 4.88. He had 17 catches, and he had a 2.67 yards after contact, which is phenomenal. And so we're jacked about Kenyan Drake heading into this year. At least I was really huge on him. I think you were too, right? So it felt really good to see what he could do in an expanded role. But we weren't the only ones that were excited to see him. In fact, Coach Gase had come out in an interview in August, and he projected that. Here's what he said, and I quote it, Coach Gase here. We're going to get him anywhere from 15 to 20 carries and 6 to 8 targets per game. So we were big on him. Coach Gase was big on him. Instead, Adam Gase goes out this year and he continued using Frank Gore, who out-carried Drake this year and was often the featured back. Now, I'll give all the credit to Frank Gore, great running back in his career, phenomenal player, and he had a very good year for a 35-year-old back. I'll give him all the credit once again. Gore is good, but he's not nearly the player that he was back in his 20s. He's not nearly as explosive and as productive as Drake at this point of his career. And so Coach Gase just refused to give Drake the carries and the touches that he promised to. He kept giving it to Frank Gore there. Going back on the fact that he promised 15 to 20 carries, 6 to 8 targets, in reality, Drake only averaged 7.5 carries per game and 4.5 targets. A far cry from what Adam Gase said he was going to get the ball. So if we take the numbers that he had and we extrapolate that based on what Adam Gase said he was going to get him based on touches, okay? So we look in the fact that Kenyan had a 73% catch rate. We look at his yards per carry, yards per catch, and his touchdown rate per touch. And we take what he projected to give him for touches. When we extrapolate that, he would have had 112 targets for 81 catches, 729 yards, 272 carries for 1,224 rushing yards, and 18 touchdowns. That's over 2,000 total yards. Now, in spite of the lower usage, he still had a productive year. He had 9 touchdowns, he had 53 catches and 477 receiving yards and 4.5 yards per carry. I know I've kind of oversimplified this. There are a lot of factors why his numbers were down. One, he had a shoulder injury. Tannehill was out for a while. The wide receiver core is a mess. They didn't have significant production from their tight ends. But there's a reason why Miami let go of Adam Gase. Obviously, he's not the answer there. So I think for me, what takes Drake from being a solid player to a breakout player is a change of scenery. In this case, the change of scenery is the departure of Adam Gase and bringing in a new head coach there. Now, when I think about a breakout player, I think about a guy like Priest Holmes, way before your time there, but I know you've heard of him. This guy had a phenomenal breakout year. If you look at Priest Holmes, he showed flashes of being good for the Ravens, but he wasn't great. He only averaged 700 rushing yards per season and 195 receiving yards and 3.6 touchdowns per year. So he was a solid back, but not a great back. It wasn't until he left there and he went to Kansas City at age 28 where he was given an opportunity and lead role. They increased his touches. When he did that, he exploded. The next 3 years, here's his rushing totals at age 28 once again, going from the Ravens to the Chiefs. 1,555 rushing yards. He had 1,615 and 1,420. Plus, here's the receiving totals. 1 year had 62 catches, 614 yards. 1 year had 70 catches, 672 yards. Then he had 74 catches and 690 yards. His touchdown totals during those 3 years, 10, 24, and 27. The guy exploded. But his best year was the one after that. Now, he only played 8 games because he got injured. But the next year, his 4th season with the Chiefs, in 8 games, he had 892 rushing yards. He had 15 touchdowns. He was on pace for 30 TDs. And he was on pace for over 1,700 rushing yards. All he needed was a change of scenery. And for me, for Drake, that change of scenery is going to take him from being a good quality back to a breakout player is the new head coach. This guy's got all the tools to be successful. I think next year he breaks out and he has a good year. Any thoughts on that?
No, I completely agree. In fact, I just saw this post today about how Adam Gase got hired as the coach for the Jets, and everyone was apologizing to Jets fans and telling them that it was too bad their season was already ruined.
Yeah.
All right, so you guys know on this channel we love the Vikings, and I think you might be a bit inclined to say that we're a little bit biased when it comes to Dalvin Cook. However, I don't think that we really are. I don't think that we are. If the guy's just not the right fit, he's not the right fit. But we look at the numbers, and things really seem to show that he's an effective running back, and he's going to have a good year. Now, he didn't play the entire season, and so he didn't have unbelievable fantasy numbers. You really have to look at his numbers per game and those sort of statistics to understand. Now, he only played in 11 games, but he still had 40 receptions and 305 receiving yards. That right there is very impressive. On top of that, his 4.6 yards per carry, I love that. 4.6 yards per carry behind that awful, in fact, brutal Vikings offensive line is very impressive. You want to kind of get an idea of how impressive that is. Latavius Murray had a rushing yards per carry of 4.1. That right there to me says, okay, that is very impressive, right? He's clearly the most talented back in that offense. And so I think we have to extrapolate and understand, like, going forward, what's going to change? What's going to take him from what he was last year to what he can be this coming year? And for me, that comes down to a couple things. One is health, two is coach, and three is the offensive line. One, when you look at that team as a whole, that defense was actually underrated. A lot of people fell apart, but it was actually a pretty good statistical defense. Kirk Cousins and those wide receivers, that was a great passing game. In fact, Kirk Cousins had a historically good passing year where he was the first quarterback ever to throw for over 4,000 yards, under 10 interceptions, and 30 touchdowns, and a completion percentage of 70%. So he had a very good year. I know a lot of people were upset with Kirk Cousins, but that was not the issue of that team. The issue of that team as a whole lied with, well, the kicker, but then also the offensive line. So one thing that I like is that team is good enough in every other position to say, we're going to focus on getting a good offensive line this year. It's been a problem for about 5 years now, and they're finally going to focus on it. In fact, coaches have come out and said that is something they're going to work on. Of course, the other thing being that offensive line took a hit because of the unfortunate death of Tony Sperano before the season. Having a full year to get a offensive line coach in there and working with a better set of offensive linemen is going to mean a huge improvement, and so I very much like that going forward for him. I also like it as far as the coaching goes. There was simply too much passing going on in that offense at the beginning of the season, and then they fired offensive coordinator DeFilippo. You know, they brought this new guy in, and he really stuck with the run. In 2 of his last 3 games, Dalvin Cook had career highs for touching the ball, and you know what? That really turned out to be very effective for him. Against the Dolphins, he had 136 yards on 7.2 yards per carry and 2 touchdowns. And then he had 73 rushing yards on 4.6 yards per carry against Detroit. He was very, very effective, and I love that commitment to getting the ball more. And then finally, we come to the health. Now, one thing, to be honest, he is a injury-prone guy, and he does carry a little bit of risk, and I'm not going to try to sugarcoat that and pretend that is not the case. However, I think he's going to be healthy going into this year. And I think that he could be healthy the entire year. First of all, just because a guy is an injury-prone player doesn't mean he's injured every single season. I think sometimes we get that wrapped up in our heads. You get burned as a fantasy player, and boom, one guy gets hurt, and then you just want to stay away from everyone who's ever been hurt. And so we do have to avoid that tendency. As well as if the Vikings do, which this is a bit of an assumption, but if they do go out and improve that offensive line, that's going to keep him healthier. Just like the quarterback position, a good offensive line keeps players healthy. I think back to when Jadeveon Clowney was in college. You remember what got him that big play against Michigan that got him really kind of to this stardom role and bumped him up in the draft was that awesome play where he just broke through the line, just crushed that running back, and he hit him right as he got the handoff, and he knocked his helmet off, and he hurt the running back, and he just looked like this physical monster. Those are the kind of plays that hurts running backs. Those are the kind of plays that can really ruin their career and limit their health. And those are the kind of plays that happen because an offensive line struggles to even slow down and stop a defensive lineman. And that was something the Vikings struggle with. So I think that an improved offensive line is going to help his health out quite a bit. And then finally, of course, him being involved in the passing game and being healthy is just going to keep him on that field all season long.
All right. I hope you're right. Well, I agree with you, but as a Vikings fan, I certainly hope this is the year that he stays healthy and it comes together. But you're right, the Vikings need to address the offensive line. There's been a lot of conversation that they are going to do that. So let's hope they finally go out and do that this year. So I want to talk about Damian Williams, a running back for the Kansas City Chiefs. In many ways, he's already breaking out right now as we speak, but I still think he qualifies as a breakout candidate for next year. And here's a few reasons. One, there's no guarantee he's going to be starting back next season. I think a lot of us think that he could be, should be, but there's no guarantees. One, if you look at the definition of a breakout player, it's a marginal player in the past who suddenly becomes a fantasy stud one year. So if we apply that definition to fantasy football based on his previous year's statistics and production, I think he's a very good fit to be qualified as a breakout player for next year. Now, in order to be a breakout player, you need two things. You need opportunity and you need talent. I want to talk about opportunity here, okay? So throughout his career, he's been limited to kind of a backup player there. Now, he did have a brief win in 2017 to become the lead runner for Miami when Jay Ajayi got traded away. It was between him and Kenyan Drake. Now, most assumed it would be him getting the job. He did get increased carries, and he looked decent, but he got injured, and ultimately Drake exploded there. So he signs with Kansas City as a backup. Really, that's his role. He signed here just to be a backup, but a perfect storm of breaks, and before you know it, he gives an opportunity there. Kareem Hunt, as we all know, got released because of some issues that he had there, and then Spencer Ware takes over as lead back, and he gets hurt. Next man up is Williams. He's been productive. We'll get to that production shortly. So let's look ahead to next year. Will he become the lead guy? Well, once again, that Kareem Hunt is not going to be there. He's gone. Now, Kansas City just signed Williams to a 2-year contract extension of $8.5 million there. And I think he's continuing to build the case that he's a guy that could come back next year and be their lead back there. He's shown versatility, impressive vision. He's a tough inside runner. I think that he's definitely beginning to show that. Now, unless Kansas City goes out and either drafts a back or signs one via free agent, and that could happen, but let's look at the draft, okay? So they're not going to have a high draft pick in the first round. And I highly doubt they're going to use a first round to draft a running back there. They have other pressing needs. So if they draft a back, I highly doubt it's going to be early in the draft, meaning it would most likely be a third or fourth round or beyond. So what that would do is that running back's going to be a flyer. He's going to be a project. There's no guarantees there. They could sign one. They have $44 million projected next year that they could spend. But if you look at the Chiefs, they have a lot of restricted free agents and a lot of unrestricted free agents. So there's a lot of money that they've got to put into players like that. I don't think they're going to put a lot of money into running backs there. They've got a lot of young talent they want to lock up for the future. So you think about Kelsey, Hill, Mahomes, players like that. Many other players, even on defense, have a number. So I don't think they're going to spend a lot of money there. The proactive signing by the Chiefs when they sign him to a 2-year contract extension might be tipping their hands to next year as far as their running backs plan go. If I was a betting man, I'd put money that he's going to be their starting back next season. Okay, so he's got a great opportunity. He's playing in a great offense that loves to throw the ball. He's shown aptitude in the passing game, which if you're going to be in the Kansas City offense, you've got to be effective in the passing game. You got to know how to catch the ball and know how to run block. In fact, he's known to be a good pass blocking running back. And I think it's a great fit for a pass-heavy offense. I think another reason why he's got a great opportunity to be successful is you got Pat Mahomes, Hill, Kelsey. They're going to get a lot of attention from defenses. Rarely is Williams going to be the attention or really the focal point of opposing defense's game plan. So I think that's going to bode well for him there. As far as talent goes, he's got good size. He's 5'11", 224. In the last 4 games, he's been remarkably good. He's had twice over 100 yards rushing. He's had 5 touchdowns, and he's had a tremendous 5.63 yards per carry. 3 of those 4 games were against solid run defenses. You look at Chargers, Seahawks, and the Colts are all either top 13 or higher in terms of run defense and overall defense. During that same stretch, he had 19 catches, 144 receiving yards. I think it's compelling, too, that they haven't tried to rush Spencer Ware back. In some pivotal positions, he's had a hamstring injury, a sore hammy. I think if Williams wasn't doing so well, they would try to get him back sooner, but they've kept him benched there in some key games. Week 17 was a game that if they won, they secured home field advantage in a bye. They didn't bring him back. They didn't bring him back this week for the playoffs. I want to read you some comments from the offensive line. These are the guys that work them all the time. Here's what their observation of Williams. Here's what they say about him. This guy brings a lot of energy, the way he runs, the physicality, tackle Mitchell Schwartz said. He's got some juice in him. He's able to break some tackles out in space. He's really a complete player. They go on to say that he's the stuff he's doing on screens is awesome. The pass protection he's a great at. He's telling guys where to go. You can see he makes big plays in running position. He's able to do everything that we ask of him. He's a complete 3-down back here. The guy can do everything. Here's a defensive end that's competed against him. Here's some comments he's made about them. Defensive end for the Patriots, who made comparison to Kareem Hunt and Williams. Here's what he said. They are different backs, but they're similar in a way as far as they both get downhill, they both run low behind their pads, and they're very physical. So other teams are noticing that in him, that this guy's been very successful and he's difficult. If you look at Kareem Hunt, his average points per game per running back left him 8th and 4th the last 2 years. I think Williams could easily be a top 10 running back in this offense, yet he's a guy that will probably be drafted well outside of the 2nd round. What a great steal for you. I like Damian Williams to be a breakout player next year. All right. Anything you want to add there?
No, it sounds good. All right, so I'll start off right in the bat. Kenneth Dixon, he's a guy who has huge upside, but is probably the least sure of player that I'm talking about in these breakout players. Yeah, I do feel confident, and I think he will be a breakout player, but I always like to preface that there are some players who are more safe options than others. That's just always been the case, and it does matter when you go into your draft and when you're keeping players and making trades to know the difference. And so I do want to clarify before that starts. Now we get into it. Kenneth Dixon, he looks great. He did not play most of the season, but he comes at the end of the year and he starts just a little bit working his way in that offense. He gets a carry or two, and he gets 3 or 4, and he really starts to work his way in, and the production is there to the point where the last game of the season when the Ravens played the Browns, he had 12 carries for 117 yards. Guys, that's 9.8 yards per carry. I'm going to say it right now. He was the most productive running back in that backfield. When you look at all the other guys in that offense, he was the most productive. He finished the season with 60 carries, 5.6 yards per carry, and 2 touchdowns. He also did a little bit in the passing game. He had 6 catches for 51 yards. He's been very, very effective. Again, you look at some of those other guys like Gus Edwards, had a worse yards per carry. He struggled in some of those games once Kenneth Dixon started working his way in there. Of course, Alex Collins, and that's what we have to talk about right now, is Alex Collins and some of those other running backs. For him to have a breakout performance in 2019 and be a huge fantasy value, he's going to need to kind of instill himself in that role as the #1 running back, and his competition is Alex Collins. However, I don't think that Alex Collins has much competition. A lot of people, because he started the season as a running back, he had some good touchdowns and he looked to be the guy. A lot of people were very excited about him, but then he got injured and, well, okay, he's injured, maybe he'll come back next year and he'll reprise his role, but he actually wasn't that effective with just 4.2 yards per carry. That is 1.4 less yards per carry than Kenneth Dixon was averaging, and so I think that right there is huge. Again, and that's no small matter in an offense that seriously focuses on the running game. Something that bodes very well for him is that offense, man. Once Lamar Jackson took over, averaging something like 240 rushing yards per game, they're going to try to continue that going into next year. It's clear they like Lamar Jackson as their quarterback, and he's going to be the guy, which means 2019 will be another season with a strong emphasis on the running game. That not only means they are going to do everything they can to get the best running back in there, which I think is Kenneth Dixon, but they're just going to continue running the ball a lot and giving these guys lots of volume. And so that as well bodes very well for him. And then again, you see that stretch where this historic streak where they're running the ball at this insane level that's something that, a lot of people are questioning, can they keep that up? For one, I don't quite think they can keep that up right. Those numbers were insane. They would have set a single season record for team rushing yards. But I think they will mostly keep it up. There's always a little bit of a drop off in production when you're that insane and that on fire for such a short period of time. But I do think they can keep it up for the reason that change happened when they switched to Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson makes all the difference. If Lamar Jackson stays, the production won't be 100%, but it will continue to be a very, very effective, one of the best in the league rushing offenses. And I think when Kenneth Dixon takes over as that lead back, being the only guy in that offense that really is productive in the passing game, he could be a huge breakout star in 2019.
All right. So another guy I've got breaking out next year is James Washington, wide receiver for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Opportunity is everything, right, in order to be a breakout star, and everything points to Antonio Brown being traded away from that team. Steelers brass has said it's very unlikely he's back with the Steelers next year, meaning Juju Smith-Schuster becomes the #1 guy there, and the #2 wide receiver spot is wide open. You look at #2 wide receivers in the Steelers offense, they've been very productive. I think they're going to be more productive with the new offensive coordinator, Randy Fichtner. They're calling plays. You look at the impact he's had on that offense going into this year. He was brought in to appease Ben Roethlisberger's desire to really open things up, more no-huddle offense, more no-huddle formations, things like that. His first season offensive coordinator, that offense ended up second in the league in passing yards, 313 per game, and 313 per game, and ended up 6 in points scored per game. So that offense thrived with Randy at the helm there. Ben Roethlisberger is the third quarterback in fantasy scoring this season. He had a career-best 34 touchdown passes. So once again, this offense is geared to throw the ball often, and I think that's something that they do very well. It's a very dynamic offense with a very good quarterback, and somebody needs to grab hold of that #2 spot at wide receiver with the inevitable absence of Brown, who's going to get traded. That's going to happen. I don't see him coming back. I'd be utterly shocked. He's burnt a ton of bridges there, so I think that he's going to move on. So what about talent? Does James Washington have the talent to be the guy that can do that? Well, one, if you look at last preseason, they really talked huge about this guy in the preseason. Some of the field production he was having, some of the reports out of there talked about how impressed they were. He wowed in camp, he wowed in preseason, he was high productive in college. If you look at it last year, every day coming out of Steelers camp, the reports where he was making impressive contested catches in the end zone, he was beating defenders, he looked really good there. He also had some impressive preseason numbers. He had one game, he had 5 catches, 114 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He ended the preseason on 3 games. He had 7 catches, 158 yards, and 2 touchdowns during the preseason. He missed 1 game to an injury. Now, a lot of people point to what they would call inconsistency in his rookie season as to why they're not sure if he could be the guy next year. So if you look at Pro Football Focus, how they grade a player, one, their grades can be subjective. But their evaluation of Washington over its final 3 preseason games really points out what they would say is inconsistency and why it's hard to trust. Washington has best game in Week 15 against New England, but he had his second worst game the week after, and then the final game he had his second best season, so they're saying he's all over the map. But I think a lot of that inconsistency has to do with the inconsistent usage. Ultimately, for a player to be consistent, especially a rookie who's trying to develop, he's got to be consistently used. He's got to get the targets, he's got to get on the field. And from week to week, this guy didn't consistently see the field. I'll give you an example. Okay, this happened a lot for him. He had 1 week where he was inactive, and then the very next week he gets 70 snaps. He had 1 week he had 11 snaps, and the next week he had 64 snaps. So this guy's all over the map in terms of usage being on the field there. Look at targets. Twice this year he had 5 targets, which were career highs for him at one point. And then the very next game he had 0 targets. So once again, it's hard to be consistent if you're a rookie trying to understand and grow in the game. I think the biggest reason why he was inconsistent is he was just way down in the targets. I mean, you got Juju Smith-Schuster, Antonio Brown, James Conner, Vance McDonald, all these guys there. We just knew going into the year that even if he had talent, this is a guy that's just way down on that list in terms of the depth chart. So what did you expect? I mean, how many people really honestly thought this guy was going to go and have a huge year with players like that in front of me? I think you'd have to be very naive. So you also look at his catch percentage, which is another thing that people were really concerned with. I think catch percentage is going to be lower, in particular, Stu, if you're a deep ball threat. And he's a guy that gets down the field, he stretches defenses, but his catch percentage was very low. But he did show improvement as the year went on. Okay, I think it's important to remember too, by the way, when you look at catch percentages, it's always going to be lower for guys, once again, that get down the field. That's just inevitable. So he had a dreadful game against the Denver Broncos there where he made some mistakes, had dropped, that was just brutal. And then afterwards, Ben Roethlisberger called him out on the radio. Okay, early in the season, his catch percentage sat at 32%. His yards per catch were 9.63, and his yards per target were 3.08. Those are not very good numbers, right? But over the Steelers' final 4 games, Washington tripled his yardage totals, 77 through the final 12. He had 77 yards through 12, and then 140 over his final 4 games. So you see that he increased his yardage totals quite a bit there in the final 4 games. But his catch percentage went from 32 to 61. His yards per reception went from 9.63 to 17.5, and his yards per target went from 3.08 to 10.77. So you see the final 4 games, his production skyrocketed. In the final game that Antonio Brown did not play in, Washington had a very good performance. He caught all 3 targets for 64 yards. He led the Steelers in receiving. And then after the game, Ben Roethlisberger went out publicly on his radio show, talked about how impressed he was with Washington's performance and how he's improved as a wide receiver there. So once again, I don't care how talented you are, you've got to have the opportunity, you've got to be consistently on the field. Antonio Brown's going to get traded away. I think this guy's in a great position to become the number 2 guy in an offense that's dynamic there. I think he's going to have a breakout year. I like this guy. So you mentioned earlier the last guy that Kenneth Dixon was the guy that you were least comfortable with or least confident in. I'd probably say the thing about James Washington. I like the guy. I think he's going to have a breakout year. But of all the guys that I've talked about, he's the one that would put the least confidence in. With that said, I still feel very confident. Any thoughts?
No, I agree. That sounds great. All right, and here I am for my last guy. I think you got to talk about David Njoku. Now, it's odd. We've covered a lot of tight ends in this video, but why steer away from it? If we think a guy is going to break out and have a good performance, then we might as well talk about him, and especially at that position that is so thin, then it especially needs it. First off, I'd say we got to get going and talking about Baker Mayfield, because you can't talk about the production of a tight end without discussing whether or not his quarterback is going to be there to get him the ball properly, and Baker Mayfield is absolutely going to do that. Despite starting just 13 games, Baker Mayfield set a rookie record 27 touchdown passes. I love Baker Mayfield right now, guys. I think he's going to be awesome in his development. Of course, as they're looking forward to a new coach this season, I love that everyone in that organization has come out publicly and stated that the number one thing they're looking for is a coach to continue developing Baker Mayfield. That's huge. With a production like that, a lot of teams would say, all right, let's focus on the run game and the defense. No, they're saying they want to continue growing their quarterback, and I wouldn't be surprised if he passed 30 touchdowns this year. That alone bodes very well for David Njoku's season. His development has bode very well. He went from his rookie season having 32 catches and 386 yards to last year having 56 catches and 639 yards. So you can see that he has seriously developed and had a lot of improvements. Now he's going to have a full season with a much improved quarterback and a much better coaching staff. That right there for me is a huge thing going forward. I also like that he's the second leading receiver on that offense behind Jarvis Landry. And of course, I think there's a lot of things going on very well for him. He's a very, kind of like O.J. Howard talked about, he's a big wide receiver. He's very athletic. I remember going into this season, the big knock that people had on him was, well, he's just a big playmaker, and that's all he does. He's not a consistent tight end. He just makes big plays, and that to me is not really an insult on the guy. I think that is huge for him. And then finally, with 27 receiving first downs that he had last year, that means he is a dependable guy. You can rely on him to catch the ball and make the plays. As all tight ends do, he's going to play a bit of a safety blanket role for Baker Mayfield, and I think that's going to seriously increase his volume going into next year. So that's why I like David Njoku going into that year. Very simple guy, not a lot to talk about, but everything bodes well for him, and I really don't have any specific one thing that makes me feel any concern for him.
Yeah, when he came out of college, a lot of people said that he was a little bit of a project, but that of all the tight ends out there, many of the experts felt like he had the highest ceiling in terms of just raw talent. And so I think this guy could do a lot there. I love Baker Mayfield too, by the way. So we'll get to my final breakout player next year. That's Kerryon Johnson, running back of the Lions. So we previewed him on our website before the season started. Here's what we said. I took the quote off of there. And it said, Blunt's 31. He's a one-trick pony. And then Abdullah is not the answer. His yards per carry dropped to career worst 3.3 last year. He can't stay healthy. So Johnson's in a great situation to really take over this role. Johnson's smaller, but he's an aggressive runner with good acceleration. We think he's got a bright future. It's unlikely he takes over as a lead back. We see that 2019 looks to be a breakout year for him. So we talked about the potential, the talent, where he's at. We thought he'd do a few things this year, but really that 2019 will be the year that he could really take over. With that said, really 3 games in this year, Kerryon Johnson really took over. It became clear to everybody there, including the coaching staff, that he was the best running back on that team. So the Auburn running back, Detroit traded up in the second round to get this guy. And then he goes out and he has a 100-yard game in week 3 against the Patriots. It was 5 years ago before the Lions last had a 100-yard running back. That just tells you how bad that offense has been running the ball there. So he's 100 yards rushing against a Patriot. He does it again against the Dolphins. Now, he didn't play a full season. He had a knee injury. Now, what happened at some point, it was very clear that Detroit was not going to make the postseason, so they shut him down. Why risk it with your future running back there? They want to preserve his knee for the future. So he didn't get a full season. But what he did this year is he had 641 rushing yards in 7 starts. He had 32 receptions and 213 receiving yards. And 2 of the last 4 games, here's the receiving numbers. One game he had 6 receptions for 69 yards. Another game he had 6 receptions for 38 yards. So this guy's not only a good running back, but he's a very complete player. He can be used very effectively in the passing game. I think that bodes well, especially in the modern NFL, where if you can't catch the ball as a running back, you don't have a really long future in the NFL. He had yards per carry of 5.4. That was second in the NFL. And he was very consistent. He averaged 5 yards per carry in 6 of 10 games, and he was only under 3 yards per carry once during that stretch, so he's very consistent. Talked to the media after clearing out his locker, getting ready next season. I love what he said here. He's, I got to train harder. Obviously, what I did in this past offseason wasn't enough. I've got to do more. I think that with more preparation, now that I don't have to focus on the combine, I can come in better shape and be prepared to have a great season. I love a guy that's got that sort of drive. It could easily sit back and thought, well, you know what? This is my job. I'm going to be the running back of the future here. I did well, but he didn't want to do that. He wants to improve. He's still young. He's only 21 years old. So last year, Saquon Barkley and Chubb were great. I think that was undeniable, right? Those guys were phenomenal. Those are the 2 guys that you want to have. You look at Sony Michel. Sony Michel looked really nice. And then you've got Lindsey. Lindsey was a pleasant surprise, although Lindsey's a bit undersized. I think he's going to have a hard time staying healthy in the NFL. So for me, when I take a look at the two best backs for me coming out this year, Barkley and Chubb, after that, nothing against Sony Michel or Lindsey. I love those guys. I think they had a bright future. But after Barkley and Chubb, I think the best running back in terms of on-field production for rookies, I think it was Johnson. I love this guy. I think he's going to be huge next year. So.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. In fact, I'd take it one step further and say I actually like Kerryon Johnson a little bit more than Chubb. Not necessarily fantasy-wise, but as pure talent goes, for sure.
I think he's a more complete, versatile back. I don't know if he's as physical, but I definitely think he can do more in the passing game. So
yeah.
So that's it. This is our breakout players from 2019. Here's what we want to hear. One, what do you think about these players? Who are your breakout players looking ahead to next year? I know it's early, but is it ever too early to talk fantasy football? No way. Once again, thank you for supporting us. Subscribe, comment, share the videos. Look for some changes we're going to make in the off season. We're excited to once again improving our product for you guys. God bless and take care.